Today I have with me Ken Neevel from Multiplication Network. Thank you, Ken, for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
And I just want to give our congregation or those listening kind of an overview of what Multiplication is, Multiplication Network is, and how we partner alongside of you and what you're doing globally with Indigenous leadership. Yeah. So let's just start. What's Multiplication's vision or mission?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Thanks for having me. Multiplication Network has a vision of seeing a healthy church representing the kingdom of God in every community. Now, keep in mind there are roughly 5 billion people in the world who don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And there are hundreds of thousands of towns, cities, and villages that don't have a church. Now, in most of the world, if you can't walk to it, it doesn't exist, whether that's a grocery store, whether that's a school or a church. It's hard to imagine in northwest Iowa that there's places without churches. Right. But in Cambodia, for example, there are over 12,000 towns, cities, and villages with no Christian church. In Russia, over 120,000. And so really our vision is to see a healthy church representing the kingdom of God in every community. And our mission is to equip the leaders with the tools to strengthen and multiply healthy churches. Yeah. Healthy is a key word there.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that Multiplication does, tell us kind of how are you set apart? Because we hear over and over of people discipling people in other countries. But I think your vision and the way that you multiply churches looks different than maybe what we typically think of when we think of going into places and creating churches.
Yeah, first of all, defining a church is sometimes difficult, and it might be different than what we would expect here. As we sit here in a beautiful space, we often define church by the building that it's in, and that's not true in most of the world. So the three things that are distinctives for Multiplication Network are, number one, nationals training nationals. Our U.S. team is really only 25 people, and about a third of them are part-time because we are training the people who are out in the field, boots on the ground. You get much better return on the investment, bigger bang for your buck, but also sustainability, reproducibility, accountability, people who already understand the language and the culture. And just think back just 5 years ago when there's a global pandemic and many missionaries were sent home or called home. Well, in our case, our people are already home. Yeah. So they continue to minister and work where they live. So nationals training nationals, that's a big part of what we do. The second thing would be working through partnerships. Who are the people that know the people, know the culture the best? So we have over 300 denominations and parachurch ministries that we have signed agreements with. And it's a wide swath of evangelical, Bible-believing denominations and people. So everything from the Reformed and Christian Reformed to the Presbyterians, Baptists, Assemblies of God, and the Russian Pentecostal Union. It's a pretty wide group. But they're the ones we're training their people. There's no Multiplication Network church anywhere. There are Baptist church and Presbyterian churches and Assemblies of God churches. We are training their people. So first thing is nationals training nationals. Second thing is working with partners. And the third that is really distinctive for us is the modular training process. 12 steps, 12 modules. But it's not just learn 12 steps. It's 12 modules that take typically a year, one module a month, and it's an action and reflection model. So we're going to teach you the first set of tools. How do you share your faith? How do you define your community, your culture? And then you go out and put it into practice for a month. Come back and we'll build on that, train in the second module, send you back out to do it, repeating that process and building on it. So eventually you're getting into inductive Bible study and then preaching and then leadership development. And through that process, over that 12 months, you will have started your first church, some cases more than one church. Yeah. So those three things are the distinctives.
Yeah. And I think, one question that people might have, because you talked about multiple denominations. Yeah. And so when you're saying we're training them, that kind of brings up that question, like, wait, what are you training them in if you have multiple denominations. Like, how does that work? How does that partnership work with the denomination?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember when I was being considered for my role with Multiplication Network, I currently serve as Vice President of Development and Communication, and our president and founder was telling me about the fact that they would have a training group where they might be training 6, 7, 8 different denominations at the same time. And I said, wait, time out. What does that look like? Because in my North American context, we can't even get along in our own denominations, much less cross-training. And it's one of the really beautiful things that I've experienced and I've seen is that denominations are working together. I'll give you one example of that. In the Dominican Republic, there are 13 denominations now working together. They come together every month. The leaderships of those denominations get together. They call it the National Roundtable. And they are training together, and they're figuring out ways to reach the Caribbean islands. They have a vision of starting 12,000 churches, to have a church for every 1,000 people in the Caribbean islands. And they said there are too many things that we're focusing on that are separating us from each other, and we need to be focusing on the distinctive of Jesus Christ. And so they're now working together, and it's an amazing thing. And so what we'll do in our training is, as John explained it to me when I was actually interviewing for this, he said, we focus on the tools that someone needs to be an effective church planter. What we don't focus on is the distinctives of their faith tradition. So, for example, baptism. We teach the importance of baptism. But does your faith tradition say that should be done by immersion or through sprinkling? It doesn't really matter to us. What we do encourage is each denomination or each parachurch partner add a 13th module to their training and teach then your people the distinctives of that faith tradition that are going to be distinctly defining for them about who they are and what their faith tradition is about.
Yeah, and I would say that our church in particular saw that in practice in Guaymas, Mexico, where we saw the groups come together. There was Pentecostal, there was now under the Reformed theology, coming together to be trained, but then going under their hub of what denomination they're partnering with to really hone in on what does that training mean for Reformed theology.
Right, exactly.
And so we have been able to see that in practice, and it's just a really cool way to see them even sharpen one another.
Absolutely.
As leaders, that is not denominational, but like what are we saying about the word? Because it doesn't take away the inerrancy of the word. It doesn't take away like the things that we would find important.
Right.
And so I think that that's an important distinction of what Multiplication Network is doing. Like, you're not becoming where many gods are available, but you still have the theology that that unites us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's unwavering. I mean, it has to be Trinitarian, Father, Son, and Spirit, biblically focused church or denomination. And all of our materials are available online for free. We don't charge, there's no cost to a church planter to be trained. And I had somebody ask me, so what happens if the Muslims get a hold of your training and they want to use it? Are you going to be okay with that? Well, we're not going to teach them. But hallelujah if they get a hold of our material and they want to teach it, because it's biblically based training material, right?
Yeah. So how many countries are you present in currently?
Well, we received reports, and we can talk about verified ministry in a minute, but we received reports from 76 countries last year. We actually have some type of nascent work in over 100 countries right now. But we talk about phases of development, phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 is where we're just starting to see some activity taking place. Phase 2 would be where they haven't started 10 churches in a single year in that country, but have some actual training going on. And then a phase 3 is a fully developed country. So across the board, we're working in over 100, but 76 is where we have verified results from.
Yeah, so tell us about the verified results.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we see the input, we're sending finances, we're seeing, but then what does that look like to get the output? Yeah,
thanks for asking, because verified ministry is an important component of what we do. I have to be able to sit here with you with confidence and integrity and say, this is what was done through the generosity of your support, right? And so verified ministry, we do that in a number of different ways. And it happens in multiple layers, if you will, or multiple levels throughout our process. So each church planter, when they enter into the process, when they have formally made the commitment to be trained and start the process, they will fill out what we call an ABC report. And an ABC report is really just a profile. Who are they? Where do they live? What's their testimony? Who are they going to reach? Some of the basic information about them. And we file that. We have a very powerful database where we track all of these results. As they begin their training process, each time they come back for training, our goal is for them to complete an update report for us so that we have, ideally we would have at least 4 reports a year from a church planter. I say ideally, really ideally we'd have one every month that they're coming to training, but realistically, if we can get 4 quarterly reports, which we're getting from most places, that's then verified by their trainer, whoever's leading their process, but also every one of our church planters going through the process has to have a coach or a mentor. And so that coach or mentor, oftentimes it's their sending pastor, but not always, but that coach or mentor is helping to verify that data. Then their trainer will verify it. Then we have a national coordinator in each one of those countries. They are spot checking these results as well. That goes to one of our 7 global hubs where they also are spot checking before it comes into our national database. On top of that, we add an additional periodic layer where we work with an outside research firm and basically ask them to do an in-depth study. We wanted to know how many of our churches that are started are surviving and thriving 3 to 5 years out. And so their role is really to go back and do a deep dive. We've done that now in 8 countries. Our 9th country is under work right now. It takes about a year for that kind of research to happen because they got to track down all these church planters and interview them, and some of it's done. There's a number of different ways they do that. But then they provide us with a full in-depth results of what's been happening over the last 3 to 5 years and how many are surviving and thriving. So we really want to verify. It's important that we have confidence in the numbers that we're producing, but also that accountability is really important to the church planter because it helps them in their follow-through and in their growth and development.
Yeah. So, I mean, we hear churches started 14,500.
And 31.
And 31, maybe 32 today. But can you, zoom that into one story? Because that number, I think, is really hard to grasp. How is that happening? Yeah. Can you zoom that into one story that you have seen happen? One person, one church planter.
Yeah, I can. Thank you. So in 2024, you're right, we started 14,531 verified new churches in 76 countries. And I've been privileged to visit a number of those, but I can think of many, but I'll just share one story from Panama, just outside Panama City. I was fortunate to be there a couple of years ago, and I met Pastor Ronald. Pastor Ronald was, he was a contractor by trade, and there was no church in his village. He would travel to go to church, and his pastor saw in him and his wife the gifts to plant a church in their community, and so recommended him for the process, and they went through our training. And so Pastor Ronald, when I met him in his church, which was on the roof of his house. Now, in his particular village, it's very hilly, and so the roof of his house was flat, and it was really at street level because he was built on the side of a hill. And because he was a contractor, he had access to door jams and shipping pallets, and he had built a frame over the roof of his house, covered it in plastic, and had about, I don't know, at that point, 100 chairs. He had baptized 80 people in his first year of ministry in that village. And so I met one of the young men who was one of the first to be baptized. He had actually been an alcoholic and a drug abuser for 27 years, since the age of 12. And when I met him, he had been clean and sober for a year. So this church was just about a year old. And he said to me, he was so on fire for the Lord. And he said, we're going to go, and he pointed up the hill to the next village, and we're going to start a church up there. And I said, well, Pastor Ronald, how are you going to do that? And he said, well, I'm a contractor, and he said, Jose is an electrician, and Maria is a really good cook. And he kind of went around and he just cherry-picked a handful of people from his church. And he said, we've all decided we're going to donate our services, our special skills, 1 day a week to that village. And as we share our skills, we're going to share Jesus with them, and we'll plant a church. Well, that's what we teach them. How do you share your faith, and how do you build people into a community that then can grow into what we might more normally or formally call a church? Yeah. And I'm happy to say that a year later, John Wagenveld, our president and founder, was back in that village, saw Pastor Ronald again, and they now had brick walls, concrete walls on the church, and the plastic tarps were gone, and they were still adding on, and they would build it as they could. Yep. But that church was continuing to grow and continuing to minister, and they had, in fact, started a new church up the hillside in that new village.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think it's hard when you haven't walked into that context to understand that the change of heart not just changes a person, but you see whole communities be transformed because of God's redemptive work.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that that's really cool to take people with those indigenous stories who understand the hurt, who understand where that community is coming from, and to watch their testimony change their community.
Yeah. And you just said something there that's really critical. Why church planting? I mean, why do we invest in church planting? Well, the Great Commission says go and make disciples, right? It doesn't say go make believers, doesn't say go make churches, go make disciples. We believe that if we make disciples who make disciples, they will be the hands and feet of Jesus. He gave us a command to be his hands and feet, to reach the people around us. And so if your heart beats for the widows and the poor, for the hungry, for education, for poverty, for prison ministry, whatever that is that God has laid on your heart, that's a beautiful thing. But there should always be a little space in there for church planting, because if you start a church that's making disciples, by definition, those disciples do all of those things that your heart beats for, and makes more disciples. So it's the pebble in the pond that creates ripples that create ripples.
Yeah. I always had a professor who would say, one Christian is not a Christian. And it always confused me a little bit, but it made me realize if you are one Christian and you haven't changed anything around you, are you?
Yeah.
And I think that that's just a really beautiful picture of how God created us to be communal and interacting to change.
Yeah. God himself is communal, right? Yeah. Father, Son, and Spirit is a community.
Yeah.
So God created us in his image to be in community with each other.
Yeah. So our church will ask, so what does that mean for our church? Where are we located? What's happening in the places that we're investing in?
Yeah, thank you. Well, so as a church, thank you for your investment in this, for your partnership in this. It started out with financial investment and prayer investment. You and I went to Cambodia together with a small group of people to dig in and look at the work and see, first of all, are we really who we say we are, right? And thankfully, I think you found out we are. Yeah. But your investment has been primarily in Haiti and in the Western Caribbean, because you're already active there and doing work. And so we've seen hundreds of churches started in both of those countries. And, true change, those are some very troubled countries, as you know as well or better than I do. True change has to happen from within. And so that's one of the reasons we're making that investment there, is to raise up leadership, Christian leadership, who eventually will make disciples who hopefully will rise up into government positions and other leadership positions in the country, and maybe really change the complete face of those countries. Yeah. And then more recently, you, along with some other churches, have invested in the work in Guaymas, Mexico. And that's really been fun to see that develop somewhat organically, really, between you and Emmanuel Church in Paramount, California, and Cornerstone Church in Chowchilla, California, to work with what they had already started there and see that grow, where they were training some church planters, but really didn't have maybe the right kind of tools to do it effectively, or as effectively as they could, maybe is a better way to say that.
Yeah.
And so being able to engage them in some proven methods and give them the tools, not for physical buildings, that's you and others are doing that through other partnerships, but to really raise up the leadership who is spreading the gospel and planting churches in different places in different ways around Guaymas, and then ultimately to build a church planter training center so that this can be replicated more and more for more people to send more people.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting, the story you told of Panama. I could just change names, and it would be a very similar story of somebody who was caught up into the world of drugs and really the world taking over their life and coming to one of those church plants and being changed. So it really is happening, and just thank you for coming and letting us take a peer into what you're doing. And hopefully as we continue to partner through the years, we'll hear more stories and understand better how our place right here in Orange City can change how God moves. Well, we won't change how God moves, but we get to peer into how God is moving. So thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for being a part of it.